Welcome to this version of our TAWC Talks series. Today we have Dr. Josh Weiss with us from the Masters in Science in Leadership and Negotiation program. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. So can you tell us a little bit about the program?
Sure. So this is a new master's degree program that launched last fall. And the idea behind the program is to really help to isolate some critical skills for people in the workplace today. Leadership and negotiation have been consistently rated as the most important relational skills that are out there. And more and more employers are seeking people with these kinds of abilities. So the goal of the program was really to help people to move on some level from where they are, which is doing their job in a very good way, but not really knowing how to deal with people. And much of our jobs, much of our life is dealing with people. And we just didn't learn those skills long ago. And so for many people, they're interested in how do I do my job effectively, but also put myself in a position where I can lead, because leadership is not just happening at the highest of levels anymore. It's happening throughout organizations. And then when I get into difficult and challenging situations, how do I negotiate? How do I manage my way through that in an effective way?
Great. And what kind of students do you find are more geared towards this particular program?
Yeah, the program is really, it's open to everyone for sure. And we have some folks who are now beginning to see that coming right out of college, it's something that they're going to need. But the majority of people who have been applying for the program and who are actually in the program now are really mid-career folks who, as I said, are quite competent at what they do in terms of their work, but want to move from where they are to the next level, or are thinking about a shift and feel like having these skills would really help them. And so I'd say the average age is 30 to 45, 50. And so people in that realm who have been in the workforce for a while and who are really looking to take the next step in their career.
Great. Do our students have to have a specific bachelor's degree program in order to move into this major, or is it from any field?
They really don't, and that's the interesting thing about leadership and negotiation is that it really cuts across every sector. If you think about whether it's technology or health or science or education, every realm requires leadership and every realm requires negotiation. So it doesn't really matter what people are doing, and so the reality is actually for many of them that these kinds of skills fit into any kind of disciplinary background, and they also draw on a multidisciplinary kind of perspective, so that you need to learn in the program about psychological aspects of things, about the cultural dynamics involved, about other situational kinds of realms, so that you get a very multidisciplinary perspective on leadership and negotiation in all of this.
Excellent. So now this program is available fully online, and how many credits is the program?
So the program is 12 classes and 36 credits. Currently there aren't any electives, but there are, the program really starts with 3 core courses of an intro to negotiation, then an intro to leadership, and then an advanced leadership and negotiation course. And then once you have that foundation, then you build off of it by branching into very specific realms that are quite critical for leadership and negotiation. So that might be, there's one course on the psychological concepts of leadership and negotiation, another one on the virtual and multicultural elements of leading and negotiating. And then we move into a course specifically on gender and the role of gender and the differences and how do you manage that, particularly for women, which is something that's been quite a challenge in many ways for them as they make their way through the workforce. And after that, we then shift and get into a lot of skills-based courses where people have an opportunity to really dig in and work on themselves. And I would say, very importantly, that for people who are interested in this program, part of this is an exploration and a journey. You can't be effective at leading and negotiating unless you understand yourself well. Nelson Mandela, who you may know, once said that I never really learned to be an effective negotiator until I really understood myself. And so the program itself is very much an inward journey as well as an external journey, that you've got to really understand the things, for example, that challenge you. Because a lot of the things we bring to leadership and negotiation is our own baggage. And if we don't understand what that is and how that's impacting us, we can't really be effective. And there's plenty of time to, of course, look at the people around you and across the table. But in many ways, a big part of the challenge and a big part of the degree that the students find particularly interesting is really thinking about themselves and how they approach and deal with different situations. And then we finish with really a case study course that really looks at different leaders and negotiators and how they've specifically tried to lead and negotiate in their own way. And then lastly, there's a capstone where students have an opportunity to really focus on the kinds of aspects of leadership and negotiation that are most interesting for them and apply it to their own world. And so, one of the great things that I've been seeing with the students to this point in the program is that they're taking the concepts and the theories and they're applying them to their work situations. And so we're having very rich conversations online around, well, today, I had this negotiation, here's what happened, where did things go wrong, or what did I do well? And so there's a wonderful sort of back and forth between the concepts, ideas, and theories, and people applying this on a regular basis.
Oh, great. So they are taking the skills back to their work and applying that in the real life.
Yeah, in fact, I just got an email yesterday from a woman who told me about her recent salary negotiation, that she actually was able to get an increase by using some of the things that we talked about that she otherwise would not have even thought about. And it was around salary, but also, for example, the company where she works, they were shifting her to a different division, but there's a software program that she really loved, and she wanted to keep it. And she was able to negotiate that as part of her increase. And so sometimes when we talk about negotiation, people get very focused on the money, and yet if we think more broadly, we can actually find a lot of things that we value. I mean, all you have to do is think about your own workplace and what's important to you there, right? Obviously, resources matter to us, but a good environment, working with people and colleagues, being able to handle conflicts when you've got challenges that come up around daycare or sick time or benefits and things like that, all of those things are important to us. And yet, sometimes folks take a slightly narrow view of the negotiations they engage in. And so part of the goal of the program is to help people really think differently and more creatively, because we're surrounded by these challenges all the time. If you think about your life, you've got work, home, and sort of the world around you. And there's clearly lots of leadership and negotiation things that transpire at work. At home, you have some of your most important negotiations that are happening all the time. And then in the world around you, really, you also have things where you're calling a credit card company and have to discuss a bill while you're negotiating. Or a problem happens around customer service, or whatever it might be. There's endless opportunities to negotiate. And I think when people begin to see that the world is comprised of these processes and approaches and requires these kinds of skills, not only does the world begin to make a little more sense, but you also have a way of approaching these kind of challenges without feeling overwhelmed. And that's really what I see a lot. A lot of times I do work with training with companies and training individuals and organizations, and people come up to me at the end and say, that's great, I can see so many applications for my working world, but I can also see how I might use this with my kids and my spouse and things along those lines. So in many ways too, I mean, there's life skills embedded here, and I think that's why I love teaching this, because I see and hear from people all the time how these kinds of things really help them in many ways.
Great. Are there any common misconceptions that you find people have about the program or the content that's within the program?
There are massive misconceptions. The media is not really a friend of leadership and negotiation. Often, they're talking about, for example, negotiation, and it comes up like, we won't negotiate with terrorists, or we won't. Negotiation is about compromise, and you have to give up what's most important to you. And all of those things are sort of fallacious notions. The reality is that, for example, the best negotiators don't compromise. Compromise is the easy way out of negotiation. The best negotiators are problem solvers. They're people who are very creative. They flip a problem 6 different ways to see how they can actually find a solution that might actually meet the needs of both parties. I don't talk too much about win-win because I feel like it's gotten a little bit cheapened in our world. But I do think that people can both gain if they go into it with the right attitude. And that's really, the gauge for me, of success is, are you meeting your interest as best as possible? And if you're engaging in a process of negotiation or leading, and you're able to help people to follow you in a way that accomplishes the task, or meets your interest as best you can in a negotiation, then you're really doing well. And so there are a lot of misconceptions. Another one that exists is that reaching agreement is the mark of success in negotiation. The reality is there's a lot of bad agreements out there. I work with a number of sales teams, and their company will say to them, don't come back without an agreement. And I say, could you please stop telling them that, because they're coming back with any agreement, and this is not good for your company. A better gauge is, you've got a goal, you have an interest that you're trying to achieve in a negotiation. Can you do that as best as possible through reaching agreement here, or at the end of the day, if you go through a process and realize, I think I can do better elsewhere, that's a successful negotiation. And so there are a lot of misconceptions, and part of what we do in the very first class is actually challenge a lot of those and get people to realize that negotiation is much more of a mindset, and it's a way in which you see and approach problems. I mean, negotiation really is the core tool that we have to resolve most of the conflicts that we encounter on a daily basis. And it always surprises me that we never learned this when we were younger. My children are starting to learn it in their school, which is great, and I think there's more hope for for that generation in terms of knowing how to manage a lot of these kinds of challenges. And so, there's a lot of misconceptions around that, and the nature of leadership has really changed, as I mentioned before, that what we used to think of a leader as a dominant figure and in a very hierarchical kind of structure is one model that's still there, but we're working in virtual ways, we're working in flatter organizations, people are being asked to take on all kinds of different challenges. And to do that, they really need an ability to say, so how do I get people to really go where I want them to go? Many times I don't have an ability to force you to do it. Right. You're my colleague, but I'm the one leading the project. So how do I persuade you? What's effective in influencing people to come where you'd like them to go? And the more, and like I said, also virtually when we're working in different contexts, particularly more and more internationally, people, that's part of their job nowadays is to work virtually and through email or video conferencing and working with people in different cultures and different countries. And so realistically, there's a whole skill set around how do I work with people in that context that's different than being in an office setting solely. And that's not going away. That's here to stay. That's part of the future. And so, one of the nice things that we do in the program is we give people a lot of opportunity to do role plays and simulations via video conferencing, via email, so that they can begin to see what dynamics exist and what don't in those contexts, and how do I make up for that. So, for example, in email, right, we don't have the emotional tone that comes through. So how do I try to make sure that my communication is clear? Because the rule in email is if it can be misinterpreted, it will be, right? Mm-hmm. So how do I try to really eliminate those problems by bringing in excessive clarity, is what I like to call it, but getting your message across in a way that people really understand what you mean. And that's hard. It's much harder than, it's easy to say, it's very challenging to do. I often feel like communication should have probably been called miscommunication, because really, often we think we're being very clear with people, but what they end up taking away is not what we intended. Mm-hmm. And so, we end up having all these challenges that get in the way of effective leadership and negotiation.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming today and sharing with us a bit about this program. Is there anything that you want our students to know that we haven't talked about already?
Just that, to reach out to me. I'm available. My email is joweiss@baypath.edu, and very available to talk about whether the program is right for them. And if it is, how might it be right for them, and what other opportunities they might have to use the degree going forward. There's lots of questions about whether the degree is appropriate and how would I use it and what are the opportunities, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about that. So feel free to reach out via email or through admissions and get in touch with me so that we can have a conversation and talk through what your needs are and and what would be most helpful with this degree.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining us today and talking about the program.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.